Welcome, everyone. It is noon on the East Coast, and we are thrilled that you have decided to join us for our Healing Network partner meeting. I get the inside scoop of seeing people entering the waiting room. So until that dies down, we're going to just wait till they can all join. We're glad that you're here. Do a little housekeeping while we wait for them to come in. If you are comfortable, we encourage you to put your full name as your screen name so everybody knows that you're here and who you are, especially if you choose to share in a little bit. If you also would like to introduce yourself in the chat feature, tell us where you're from, what organization you're representing. That would be tremendously helpful. And if you will make sure, you should be muted as you come in, but if you can stay muted until we have the opportunity to ask questions and engage with one another, that would allow us to stay focused on the speaker. And you're more than welcome to have your video on or have your video off. Either way, we just really want you to be available to what is going to be shared today. Some great content regarding intakes and asking about those big questions. Have you experienced abortion? What was it like for you? Okay, I am just continuing to watch behind the scene here. We still have a few more folks that are joining.
Oh, wow.
Again, if you're interested, just share your information in the chat and we will get started. I don't see any more people. What a day. All right. So again, welcome. My name is Lisa Rowe. I have the honor and privilege of serving as the CEO for Support After Abortion. Karen and I were at a pregnancy center meeting yesterday with some of our local pregnancy centers here in Southwest Florida. And it was just such a reminder for me of where we've come from. To see 80 of you on this call collectively made intentional time, carved out intentional time in your schedule to say this is important. It just means so much to me because we've been on this journey and it used to be 30 people. Sometimes it was 15 people. And to see that this global initiative is really connecting to each of your hearts and then those that you feel inspired to share with is just really amazing to me. So we're glad that you're here. We're here to talk about one of the key elements that we see across the industry regarding abortion, and that is the intake. And so we are honored and privileged to have one of our friends, our strategic connections. Some of you work directly with her, Jane Abate. And so I'm going to make sure that I read her, her amazing bio because I don't want to miss anything. Jane has succeeded as an executive director and entrepreneur. Yet she considers supporting people to heal from abortion as the most important part of her work. The author of Where Do Broken Hearts Go? Healing and Hope After Abortion. Jane leads small groups to explore the emotional aftermath of abortion and to grow beyond that painful experience. And like I said, many of you have enlisted her to help share in leading those groups. She is part of the aftercare teams for Rachel's Vineyard in Richmond and St. Louis. Believing God's promise that He has great plans for us, Jane offers mentoring to build the mindset, skills, and habits that lead to a really good life, no matter what. You can follow Jane through her YouTube channel, which we'll share in the chat if we haven't already. It's called My Mentor Jane, and download helpful resources through her website, mymentorjane.com. So those will be in the chat for you if you're interested. As she said in her bio, and as I know, she's working with some of you directly. And so if there's questions that you might have about how it looks and what the aftercare after a Rachel's Vineyard retreat might look like using Jane's services, I'm sure that those folks can engage with you in chat or through email. And of course, Jane would be happy to answer your questions. So I am going to welcome Jane and welcome Karen. If you two would say hello so that people know who you are, and then we'll jump right in.
Hello. Oh, just a blessing to be here. I am just thrilled to be in community with you all. And thank you, Lisa and Karen, for inviting me. It's an honor.
Absolutely, Jane. And thanks for being here. And we always like to be very authentic here. So Jane, Karen, and I met earlier last week, and we were saying, what is this going to look like? What do we need to X, 1, 2, 3, X, Y, Z. And we decided that everything we have is right here. And so we're going to have a really open conversation. You have two amazing women in Karen and Jane that are pioneers in this industry. And so what Jane's going to do is deliver her personal story as it pertains to intake and how it really applies to her own experience. And then Karen's going to come in and bring us home with some real tangible and tactical next steps that she has learned serving support after abortion, our clients, pregnancy centers, and what this actually looks like to take away what you experienced from Jane's story and make this real for yourself. So Jane, without further ado, would you kind of start us out with just telling us a little bit about your journey to healing and maybe how people intercepted you on your journey, what worked, what didn't work?
Okay, yeah, happy and honored to do that. So in my 20s and early 30s, I experienced 3 abortions. And my experience with that was to have no memory of a lot of it, to stuff the rest of it with overwork, perfectionism, drinking. And before I was married, the first time more and more relationships, sexual relationships outside of marriage. I did marry. And of course, as we know, those emotions, the guilt and the shame and the anger, they don't, even though I didn't feel them, that didn't mean they weren't there. And so I found myself becoming more and more depressed, even though I didn't realize it was that, drinking all the more, just thought that was social drinking as an executive. And just was really struggling with anger and just a lot of sadness. Finally, in the church, I was practicing Catholic at the time. I saw the advertisements for Rachel's Vineyard, and it took a couple times, probably over a couple of years, to finally trust that that was heaven sent, God sent. And I called the Rachel's Vineyard program Ann Deppner in Pittsburgh. And that was my first experience with intake. It was the first time I had talked about my abortions. My first husband knew about them after the fact. He wasn't the father of any of the children, but I never told anyone else. So when I reached out to Ann and I eventually had a conversation with Karen LaFrance, they were the first people that I told, and I didn't even know how to tell them. And what I felt was especially challenging for me is, in the material that I read, are you suffering from abortion? Well, I wasn't suffering from abortion. I was suffering from abortions, and not just 2, but 3. And so even though I finally had the courage to make the call, I was just mortified to have to say that I had had more than one. Fortunately, Karen and Ann, who I spoke to, were very compassionate and welcoming, and they provided just enough information that I needed, the emotional care and support that I needed at the time to take the next step, which was to fill out the paperwork, and then the next step, which was to show up in the parking lot and then to walk in. And so praise the Lord, I did finish the Rachel's Vineyard program, and it changed my life. It was the most important thing that I've ever done, and it changed my life and saved my life. Fortunately, I was then invited to be part of the team, and I served on the retreat team in Pittsburgh for 10 or more years until I moved to Richmond, and sat on as part of the team here. But now, as Lisa said, I do the aftercare. So I run anywhere from a 4 to a 6 week program using my book, Where Do Broken Hearts Go, as aftercare for the Rachel's Vineyard retreats. I just want to say briefly, the Holy Spirit guided me to write about 19 different emotions that are part of how I experienced abortion. And that's what the book, Where Do Broken Hearts Go, focuses on. Everything from numbness to anger to fear to freedom to joy and hope and peace. So the reason that now that I look back and I realize I wrote it that way is because I didn't experience my abortions through my head, through the facts that I had lost children, the only children I would end up having. I experienced my abortions afterward through my emotions, those kind of misplaced, displaced emotions, the bouts of anger, the loneliness that I felt, the guilt that I was drinking away. And so that was the key as I started to follow those difficult emotions. And the Holy Spirit guided me to write that book over 10 years ago now. Karen, give me a prompt. So where do you want me to kind of go from here?
Yeah.
I don't want to talk too much about me.
Let me just integrate one thing before I let you guys take this off.
Yeah.
Jane, if we were to invite your 20-year-old self to this call, right? And you brought me into this conversation earlier and you had said, I didn't want to answer these questions. I was terrified of this situation. Let's invite her into this conversation. What was it like walking into that Rachel's Vineyard interview? Was it in person? Was it on the phone? How was it conducted? What did you hear during that interview? Where were you at?
Okay. Okay. So thanks. That's helpful. So as I said, talking to the staff was the first time I had told anyone other than my husband. So I didn't even have the practice of the words coming out of my mouth. It was kind of like this out-of-body experience. I can't believe I'm actually having this conversation with a perfect stranger. Now, this was back in 1999. So it was a phone call. There wasn't Zoom. It wasn't in person. And so I couldn't even see the other person. I know they had a kind voice, but it was like talking into the dark. And I remember just feeling so afraid. And I've thought about this, and I wouldn't have said this at the time, but now that I think about it, it was like getting undressed in front of somebody. It was like with each question, I was taking off one more piece of clothing. And I knew, he's starting off with kind of the general questions, name, address, that age, that kind of stuff. Those are automatic. But I knew with each automatic question, the real questions were going to come. And at some point, I was going to have to really say that I had an abortion. I can't remember whether I said I had 3 or not. I think I did, but I don't remember. I just remember the anxiety increasing as the questions got more personal. And as I knew that at one point I was going to have to say, yes, I had an abortion. And then I didn't know, because it was a brand new experience, what all they were going to ask. And when I look back, I think, I would have been nervous. How much of it would have sunk in? I don't know. But looking back, I think it would have been helpful if I had known, here's the categories of what we're going to talk about.
Wow.
It might have been helpful to know, I'm going to ask you some very general questions about your abortion. This isn't going to be the time when I'm going to ask you to go into your story. That's very important. And we want to help you tell that story. But we want to do that not over the phone, or not until we can be face to face, or not until there's time till we can really hear the whole story. So I'm going to just ask you for some general information about it. And then I'm going to ask you, whatever, like sort of categories. And then I think coming back to those categories as kind of pacing it, like you are here, and pausing, this has been so helpful. I know this has been tough. thank you for sharing what's been really difficult for you. Now we're gonna go here. And
So
I think
good.
that could help give bearings, and also to reassure that I wasn't going to have to tell it all, because I wouldn't have even known how to do it. And of course, Rachel's Vineyard and the programs that you all run prepare you to tell it. But when you're there for the first time, you don't know.
Wow.
You don't know what's coming or how deep.
Yeah.
So it's like, yeah, it's like taking your clothes off in front of, and you don't know what's coming next.
Yeah. And I hear, so often the shame that we hear about from our clients that talk about their abortion experiences. And shame is different than guilt. Shame is I am bad, where guilt says I made a bad choice. And so often as a clinician, I help my clients understand that shame is like one of those Superman suits that we put on, that our kids put on, right? We zip it up and we try to pretend that we're something we're not, or we try to, hide from the world and our experiences. And so, Jane, as you described getting naked, it's almost the unzipping of this shame suit, and from years, right? Because it's not always just the abortion or abortions, it's the sexual abuse, it's the early trauma, it's the relationship difficulties, the drug and alcohol use. And so as you're unzipping this and you're totally exposing yourself, the vulnerable places that you've traveled, what I hear you saying is don't go for the jugular right away. Take it step by step, check in, make sure that people are able to stay with you.
Yeah. And to be purposeful and really thoughtful about, depending on, like, is this the very first encounter? It is a second one.
Good.
What is our purpose? And I know, being on the other side, doing intakes for small groups is that there's so many things that you want to know and that are important to know.
Right.
Do they all have to be asked at the same time? At what point are you now, as as somebody doing intake, kind of switching from the compassionate, caring caregiver that's part of your role to the data collector?
Yes.
To like the survey taker. And I bet you've all felt that at some point, like that discomfort, because it's getting personal. And yet here we go with question 19B, give me your email address. How does, giving my email address feel compared to, I just told you I had 3 or 6 abortions, or there's, I'm a victim of domestic or childhood abuse or whatever. So even thinking about that pacing and grouping, I think can be really helpful.
That's really powerful. So the conversation that over time, as we become more mature in our ability to sit with folks, to be able to hear the things that we really need to hear, be able to have a conversation as if we're girlfriends or friends over coffee, versus here's my iPad, I'm checking this off, I'm doing this. And so often pregnancy centers are on this call, Jane. And that is kind of the way that it is done, especially with volunteers who have little training. And we have little staff capacity. And so we're going to be talking today with Karen about what that can look like and how to get better in that realm. So Karen, if you would come off of mute, and Jane, please feel free to continue to participate as Karen begins to share more of the tangible or tactical side of this. But Karen, before we get started, is there anything that you want to add to Jane's conversation with me that would help to set the stage?
Well, I think she did a really great job. Jane, you did a really great job of describing what your experience was like. And I think a lot of that comes from the fact of it's unknown, right? Like, so we could do a much better job in the intake process to let people know why we're asking them these questions, right? Like, I'm going to ask you some questions that might seem really personal, but your answers are going to guide me and direct me to get you connected to the healing program that's going to meet your needs, right? Like that's why we're doing it, right? We're doing it because we want to connect them to the program that they're going to accelerate in, right? That their needs are going to be met in. So I think it's really important on how we conduct it, that it is very relational, that we create a safe place for them to be honest with us. And that's what the title of this meeting is what kind of questions do you ask that prompt truth? How many of you have ever lied? Like when you went to the doctor, when they asked you about reproductive losses or abortions, I did for years. I never told anybody I had an abortion because I was so ashamed and I didn't want them to talk to me about it, right? So like I lied. So how do we create that space that prompts truth so that we can really help these people, because we're all doing this because we want to help hurting people.
Yeah, it's so good.
Politics aside, religion aside, for me, I just want to help hurting people. I want people to be set free so they can walk into the fullness of their purpose and their destiny, right? And so that said, I mean, do you want me to move into like the kinds of ways that we've pivoted on our intakes? And
I absolutely do. I think that it's really important that if we can all, as people that are focusing our time on this for the next 40 minutes, really see that 20-year-old man or woman who really feels like they are about to expose themselves. And like Jane said, naked, they are about to be naked in front of you. And so as Karen begins to have this deep tactical understanding of what this could look like, it's really good that in our mind's eye, we really know who we're addressing here. And it could be the 60-year-old self that also feels like they're undressing in front of you. So yeah, so Karen, if you could, what is it that we've learned? What have been some best practices that we've stumbled upon? And how would you suggest that leaders on this call move? What direction?
Well, first, let me be completely transparent and say that we did it wrong. You know, we've learned along the way and we've changed our questions and our language along the way because we learned, right? And so there's no shame in pivoting the questions that you ask based on what you've learned from personal experience or from us, right? So Kylie, if you could pull up your slides for me, that would be really helpful. Kylie's going to share her screen. And these are some of the things that we do. Can you all see that? Yeah, thumbs up. Yeah. Okay, very good. So as I've already said, we want to create a space of confidentiality and trust. People aren't going to be honest with us unless they trust us. And so that really starts with what's your agenda, right? Do you have an agenda that you want, that barring anything else, you want them to get connected to healing? They're going to know that, right? Like the time during the intake is just to be present with them, to normalize their feelings. They're sharing stuff with you that they haven't shared with anybody else before. And we want them to know that they're not being judged, that they're being loved, and we're here to serve them. We're not trying to get anything from them. We're just here to serve them. So creating that space is really great for us. I mean, like we respect people's anonymity. I only need to know one thing about them, either a phone number or an email, just so I can correspond with them. You know, I don't need to know their name. I don't need to know where they live. We try to get a zip code because we want to be able to connect them with resources that are in their own time zone or close to their time zone. We're global. I saw that there's somebody on the call here today. I just wanted to give a shout out to Asia is with us in the room today. And so like those kinds of things when you're working with people around the world are really important. So you know what the time zone is or what time it is. And we also want to know how they want us to contact them. Everything that we do has to do with what does the client want? What are their preferences? Doesn't matter what our preferences are. We want to honor their requests, right? That creates safety for them and trust for them. We do not recommend, and we do not use the language post-abortive. We have learned over time that it's a label. There's some really negative connotations to that label, and people are offended by it. You know, that's if somebody called me post-abortive. I mean, I carry that label with me throughout my entire life. I had my abortion in 1977, right? I don't want to be labeled for the rest of my life as post-abortive. So we just don't use that language. We use language like had an abortion. We just speak fact. Had an abortion, have been impacted by abortion. Again, everybody wants to get different demographics for their own purposes. And I saw that Jody Duffy is on the call. She works with the military and veterans and their families. And we know that that community likes to heal together. They've experienced similar situations. I'm not in the military. I don't know what that's like, but somebody that's in the military can relate to somebody else that's in the military, and they prefer to heal together. So we ask that question now so that we can refer them to Jody. Again, we moved away from just asking about abortions. We ask about reproductive losses. Because if you only ask the question about abortions, you're minimizing the loss to miscarriages and stillbirths, right? We want to know about all the reproductive losses so we can get them connected to agencies that can help them sort through their emotions and their loss due to miscarriage or stillbirths or infertility or any kind of reproductive loss like that. And as Jane already said, using all of those in the plural is super important. It takes the stigma away from having multiples. So we would like to know, and again, I would explain this to somebody when I'm doing an intake with them that, I'm going to ask you about the type of abortion that you've had, because that gives me a lot of information to understand what you've been through. That's why we ask this question. What type of abortion did you have? Did you have an at-home abortion, the chemical or pill abortion, not to be confused with Plan B? Have you done a self-managed abortion? That's a new thing. I don't know if any of you have heard about that, but self-managed is when there's no clinic or medical involvement. The woman sources the pills herself and does it independently. And then there's the surgical abortions, and how people present after those is completely different, right? So having that knowledge really helps me to better understand what the client might be feeling or going through. Can you scroll up a little bit for me, Kylie, please?
I can't scroll with PowerPoint,
Oh,
but
okay.
it says if you've had abortions, what is the date of your most
Thank you.
recent?
I want to know how recent it's been, because we also know that somebody that had their abortion 2 weeks ago or 2 months ago presents much differently than somebody that had their abortion 20 years ago, right? So these questions have a purpose, and that purpose is to help me better understand what that client is going through so that I can serve them well. I want to serve them the best that I can. So we ask, and we would love for all of you to get your copies of Keys to Hope and Healing. I'm going to get a little plug for our resource, Keys to Hope and Healing, which is a secular resource. We ask if they prefer religious or secular. Not everybody is the same. Not everybody wants to start with the Bible. And we've learned that, especially for the younger girl that has had that at-home pill abortion, they don't want to start with religion, right? And we also know through our consumer research that even women decades removed don't necessarily want to start with religion. They're judging themselves so harshly, they know that God must be judging them. And that's an uncomfortable place for them to begin. And then the rest of these questions are really designed to assess the emotional and mental health well-being of the client. And we do this for a couple of reasons. One, we want to determine, are they group ready, support group ready, which is helping them to grow, or should they go into therapy, which is helping them to heal, right? And so and the other reason that we ask these questions is that we do a follow-up 1 month after they've completed their healing group or one-on-one or whatever they're getting, retreat, whatever they're getting connected into, whatever their preference is. We want to follow up with them a month later and ask these same questions in the very same way so we can see if there's been any progress, if healing helped. We are saying that if someone goes through healing, the likelihood of them ever choosing abortion again drastically drops. And we need to be able to substantiate that with some evidence-based data. Even though it's their opinion, it still shows us, in their opinion, have they made progress? Are they in a much better place than they were before they started their healing? And if they're saying no, then we're doing something wrong, right? My experience is that we're doing something really right, and we want to capture that information. So these are some of the questions that we ask. And Kylie, can we make this available to them in the chat, the PowerPoint, so that they can look at that and I don't have to spend time going through all these Likert scale questions?
Yeah, we'll send it in the postscript, Karen.
Okay.
And I'm happy to go to the next page.
Okay, very good. We're going to make this available to you so I don't have to go through all of these questions. This question about suicide thoughts is really important. If there is somebody that is currently having suicide ideations, we need to give them the phone number for the suicide hotline. I really would encourage you all to ask this kind of question, because people don't normally automatically make this known to you unless you ask it. And that comes from people that work on the suicide hotline that have struggled with suicide themselves. They have said to us in the past that you need to ask the question directly. Are you thinking of killing yourself? Are you thinking of taking your own life? And doing it directly, because they won't avoid that question if they are. So we really encourage you to take that question. And then we also ask if they've been in therapy or in counseling or in healing, and are they currently in therapy? To the next slide, thank you. And if they're currently in therapy, we want to know if their therapist supports their participation in an after-abortion healing program, because we don't want to conflict with what their therapist is working with them on, right? Therapy is, our support groups are not a replacement for professional help. And we want to make sure that that therapist is aware of it and supports the journey. So that's just a really fast and like quick overview. I know this call is really short, and we want to definitely make sure that you guys have an opportunity to ask questions. Is there anything, Lisa, that I left unsaid or that you want to draw out for me? Or
Absolutely. Thank you for opening that up. I would say that Karen and I have discussed intakes probably maybe at least once a month for several hours since we started support after abortion, because our clients are constantly teaching us new things. We're constantly learning new things from those that we're working alongside, like yourselves. And so we are always open. And I want to just emphasize what Karen said at the beginning, to pivoting to new understanding and to changing things as we learn, as culture shifts, as new understandings shift. And so I would encourage you that if you haven't taken a look at your intake, that you take a look at it. If it was passed down to you from 10 years ago and you're just using it because it's one of those things that you haven't gotten around to looking at, I would say this is one of the most important things that you have to begin a conversation and start a relationship on a solid foundation. And you can always return to it. Like Jane said, it's not something that we go all of it, but there's always, it's a path. And so maybe you stop in one place and you say, let's revisit this next time we talk, or let's take a pause and come back to this. But this is your tool to get you set up for a solid foundation. And it needs to be something you look at pretty regularly. So Karen, great job. Again, like she said, we will be definitely sharing this with you. Jane has a comment, and then we'll move into questions from you all. And so a couple things to set this up, Jane, before I let you intervene here with the conversation. If you do have a question, there's a couple ways to do this. So start preparing. You can leave a question in the chat feature. You can raise your hand on Zoom or take yourself off of mute, and we'll call on you as we are able to. So Jane, go ahead.
I just wanted to really affirm the scales, because we often don't have the words. So if it's an open-ended question, how are you feeling? It's probably a jumble. So I really love that idea of having a scale. At least it gives us a place to focus on. And for those who, tend to be stepping back and needing more time to process, at least it gives them something to answer with, than like, how am I feeling? So I really love that. And that's all I wanted to add. I'm interested to hear what the group has to say.
Absolutely. Open-ended questions are our best questions that they're going to be the questions that give us the most amount of color as we're looking at our client situations. Karen, the last thing I have before the questions, we open up for questions, is many of the pregnancy centers are here. And oftentimes the current pregnancy is of the most importance to the client in front of us. And so when we are doing our intake questions and we ask about previous pregnancies, reproductive loss, a lot of times the client is going, yeah, but that was 6 years ago, but that's not why I'm here. You alluded to it saying, Jane said, like, I knew what I was coming into. I didn't want to answer some of these questions. Sometimes our clients aren't expecting these questions. Can you help the folks that are listening better understand how you began to learn from the clients' best practices around that?
The client comes into the pregnancy center because they're pregnant and either they're happy about it or they're not, and so for those, that's their focus, and that's all they're focused on is getting an ultrasound, finding out if they can get connected to some kind of educational program for themselves, or learning how far along they are so that they can pursue abortion. And so what I've learned along the way is that we need to slow them down. People in crisis need to breathe. They're not thinking clearly. They're not hearing you. And so typically what I would do when I was the director of a pregnancy center and somebody came in for a pregnancy test, they didn't want to be pregnant, I would ask them about abortion, their reproductive losses, and they would say that they would have an abortion. And I'd ask them how they were doing, and they'd say, I'm fine. And I said, well, I'm glad that you're fine. Can we do your pregnancy test? And then can you spend another 10 minutes with me so we can circle back to see if you really are fine, right? We can't not have the conversation. It's uncomfortable, but we have to have the conversation or else we're not serving them well. And we want to serve them well, right? And so what I found is that once they have a negative pregnancy test and we have that sexual risk avoidance conversation with them, they're ready to go. And I'll just say, can I just have a few more minutes? I just want to make sure that you're okay. I tell people I'm fine all the time, just because I don't think that they're not really interested in how I'm really doing. And so why waste the time saying that I had a flat tire on the way to work and I'm not really okay? Do you really want to hear about it? And so I'm giving them the benefit of the doubt. So when we circle back around and I can be completely available to them in the present moment, looking at them eye to eye, and I can say, I had an abortion and I thought I was fine, but I really wasn't. Tell me how you're really doing. And then they'll start crying, right? The first thing that they do is start crying because somebody is really interested and is willing to take the time to hear how they're doing, right? I get a little emotional because I'm so passionate about it, that I just really believe that we need to give people the opportunity to share that secret that has kept them sick their entire life. Right? Or for me, it was for my entire life because I didn't find healing until decades after my abortion, but I want people set free, and if we don't invest our time in them and let them know that we're not going to judge them, that we just really love them and want to help them, we need to have the conversation.
So good, Karen. And if you're on this call and you haven't personally experienced abortion like Karen, we always encourage that you have someone on your team that has and has found healing. But if that isn't your story, there's other ways to have this conversation. One of the ways that I use is that is a very common response. And we understand that this isn't an easy place to travel to. But would you mind sharing with me a little bit about that story? And the minute that their brain is engaged to start revisiting that story, all of a sudden those memories come in, and that's when the tears come, and there is something that then presents. And when those tears come, or when that story generates a level of emotion, well, I'm so glad that you shared that with me. And we have support programming for that, for you, for the different level of healing that you may or may not even know exists. But providing, like Karen said, the start of a conversation that nobody else likely has ever even attempted to. So we want to make sure that people aren't on this call, don't see this as an intake question where somebody says, okay, good. We don't stop there. We want to ask more in-depth questions. We want to encourage greater understanding. And so that goes back to Jane saying, this is a conversation, not a fill in the blank. Karen, go ahead.
And just one more comment, when that person leaves your center, you might not see them again, right? We got to seize every opportunity when they're in our center for those of you that do that. So think about it that way. If they never come back.
That's really good. Thank you, Karen. Okay, we are going to turn this to questions, and there's quite a few questions in the chat, so I will read them out loud, Jane and Karen. If you guys want to talk about. You have tons of great feedback here about just affirming the direction that you're encouraging all of us to travel. One of the questions is, for a virtual program, when do you have them complete the questionnaire?
For us, we, once they register for one of our virtual groups, we send them the intake and they do it. It's like a Google form and they do it. And then if there's anything that we want clarification on, we would follow that up with a phone call.
Okay.
Virtual is a much different beast than in person. You know, I would never recommend doing an intake that way because it is so personal and intimate that if you are doing in-person kind of stuff, I would definitely do it. And I would not let them fill it out by themselves. And I wouldn't do it like a checklist, right? It would be through conversation that you would get the answers to the questions that you have on your intake, right? So it doesn't feel like they're being interviewed.
I just came from a marriage counseling session that she said, no more text messages, no more emotionally led text messages. And that's so applicable to this, right? We want to hear the tone of our voice. We want to be able to see the other person if that's possible. And this is so applicable. Text messaging and virtual platforms, it's great when your doctor sends you this information, but this is not the place or space to send this over an email, right? Even if you have 20 clients you have to follow up with, this is not the way to ask that question. That's really great. Okay, so this kind of is the same, but a little bit different. Do you have the client complete this in writing in the waiting room, or is there a combo that you prefer?
Jana, you jump in anytime, please. I would never have them doing it in the waiting room. Again, it doesn't foster truth, right? I want to develop that relationship with them. I know it takes more time, but you are investing in this person's life. Developing that relationship built on trust is key, right? So when I can talk to her and I can really validate her feelings and normalize what she's going through and make her not feel judged and whatever. I mean, even with somebody coming in pregnant who didn't want to be pregnant. Now, come on now, let me just ask you, how many times has it come into your head? Like, what is the matter with this girl? She was here 6 months ago thinking she was pregnant and now she's back here again today. Right? I'm just being honest. I'm being real because I've had that thought before, you know, like those kinds of stereotypes and stuff come through unless you can just be present with them without any kind of judgment. So I ask you to check your own thinking on the clients that you're serving, right? Like, is there some judgment in your thoughts about what they could potentially be going through? You know, and is that conveyed in the way that you interact with them? But again, we've made all the mistakes. So I'm just telling you from all the mistakes that I've made. So, you know, it's you learn and you get better. So I would always do it in person and I would have it be super relational.
Yeah, I would add, so because most of the groups now that I run are run through Rachel's Vineyard, they've already completed the intakes. So I don't do the first connection, but sometimes for my church, when I'm running a private group, I do that in person over coffee. Now I have the luxury to do that, and I'm not in a center. I'm doing this as a small group for my church, and it's as much for me to establish relationship and trust with them as it is anything else. And it's a good way for me to, from that relationship, help them make the decision about what's the next step and are they ready to take another step. Because I think for so many of us, it takes multiple touch points before we're ready to go through a group or to really look at in more detail. And I never discount those touch points. Like this, many times as I saw that bulletin sitting in the pews of church, every one of those mattered and led up to when I was finally able to make that call. So that's the only thing I would add.
That's great, Jane. So there's a question here about the woman who you've maybe done what Karen said, shared your own experience. Maybe you've revisited the conversation like I suggested, and she's still maintaining that this abortion did not impact her, but you can clearly tell that it has. How do you leave that conversation? What's your recommendation?
You can't force somebody to feel something that they're not feeling, right? Like, so what we would do is I would give them a copy of Keys to Hope and Healing And I would say, hey, listen, I understand that you're not struggling now, but there may be a time in the future when you do. And this is a resource that you can work through it's really about journaling and stuff, just so you can understand the emotions that you're having and that you can grieve your loss. That's what I mean, you can't force somebody to feel something that they're not feeling. And if you try to, they're going to know it. And that's not going to create a safe place.
It's good.
You got to know when to let go, right? What's that song? Know when to hold them, know when to fold them. Oh my gosh, I just gave away my age. That's Kenny Rogers. I'm old, but I'm a cool old. So.
And Karen, we would recommend that you have Keys to Hope and Healing right there that they can leave. We'd like to offer this resource to you so that if you do choose to revisit this at any point, it's here for you.
Yeah. Yeah. Very entry level, just starts the conversation, helps them to kind of figure out why they're feeling what they're feeling, et cetera. So
it's really, thank you. One of the folks asked why adoption isn't underneath reproductive loss on your recommended intake questions.
That's a great question. And we abbreviated for this presentation, but we ask about infertility, adoptions, children removed from your home, any kind of stillbirths, any kind of adverse diagnosis kind of stuff, anything that generates reproductive losses, but it's a really big question. I mean, like there's really a whole lot of options. The more options that you can give them, the safer they're going to feel. When you only give them one option for a response, that's very scary, right? The more options that you can give them where they can fit themselves into it, safer it is.
Wow, that's good. Jane, are you doing small groups umbrellaed under small groups or the care department at your church? Oh, you're muted, Jane.
Thank you for the question. It is listed as a small group in our small group list. Every semester that we have a small group season, it's called Where Do Broken Hearts Go? And when we have a small group fair, I'm there to participate, knowing that few people will come up and talk to me, but I want them to be aware that we have a group and this is who I am. And I've also given my testimony at my church. So it's been a while, but people know me. The people in our care department or whatever, we know that to be, they know me well. And so I have had them refer people to me so that I can talk to them. It's difficult in the church because people are so afraid of being outed among their peers. So I have not been as successful as I would like in running a lot of groups, but I have been able to run some groups through the church.
Thank you for answering that. Karen, Sarah Baldwin has her question, her hand up. And before she speaks, I just want to introduce you to her. She was in Keys to Hope and Healing with me yesterday, and she is doing a weekly, Jane, you would love this too, a weekly virtual come as you are, styled after Al-Anon meeting virtually. And so I encouraged her to come today, and she has a question for us. So go ahead. You've fallen off my screen, but I hope you're still here.
I'm still here, Lisa. Thank you for remembering me. Yes. So there's a question in here, I promise, eventually. But so you were talking about, having intakes. Well, we don't do any kind of intake process other than a small vetting of them to make sure that they're safe for the other women that are already in the group, by simply asking, simple questions like, what is the nature of your pregnancy loss? And that's really kind of it. So it is an open-ended, again, it's like come as you are. We designed it by, we kind of patterned it by the 12-step Al-Anon program. And so, and this is fairly new. We just kind of did this and are jumping in, and kind of like y'all were talking about, we're making mistakes and learning from them. And, I'm wondering, I guess my question is, I'm wondering what you think about not having an intake process and not having intake questions, but just letting them come as they are. freely, leave freely, and kind out in and out as they feel like they just need to connect with others that have had the similar experiences? I think that's a question.
Yeah, it is a question. And thank you so much, Sarah. You got the cutest little accent.
Oh, thanks.
I
Let's see.
my first reaction to that, I've never been asked that question. So my first reaction to that is that these groups are really intimate and people reveal really, really tough stuff. People coming in and out of the group makes the group composition somewhat unsafe, right?
Oh.
So they share their story at some point, and if somebody else comes in the week later, they don't know this person, they might ask them to share their story again so they can catch up. I've never been able to figure out how to do that. Now, we did think about a support group, which would talk about different topics like grief and stuff like that, but it wouldn't be intimate like a healing group, if that makes sense. Can you hear that distinction at all?
Yes, and it's really is more of just a group offered to allow women, to understand that they're not alone. This is not a process group because, as counselors, we can't practice unless we have licenses all over the United States. I mean, we're in Tennessee, so we can only actually provide like counseling and process inside the state of Tennessee, because that's how our licensure works. And I guess it's every state is like that. But
yeah, and we're not counselors. We're peer people, right? We're not counselors.
Yeah.
And so the distinction that I'm hearing is you can have a topic or you can have a speaker, a subject during a support group like that, like based on the 12-step programs. But to go to take a healing journey where it moves you from point A to point B is different.
Yes, exactly.
Yeah.
Exactly. And we let them know on the outset that this, you're welcome to come in and out as you need this, and you feel compelled to come in. I don't know. You're answering some questions of mine, because I've kind of wondered, people will come in once or 3 times and then they're gone. And I don't know, I really don't know what happens to them after that. And I'm wondering if they're not feeling safe, but we have an opening about confidentiality and safety and honoring each other's words and taking every person's words or share as sacred and safe. So we try to lay a foundation before we even open up the meeting for discussion. I'm just hoping that we're not, of course, what we don't want to do is hurt anyone. So
Yeah.
anyway.
And let me stop you there, Sarah.
Sarah, go ahead, Lisa.
Just something that Karen, I wanted to do is after this call sometime connect with Sarah. This has always been a dream of Support After Abortion, to have more of a drop-in, anonymous, confidential connect, wherever you are. Sarah, if you have some people interested in knowing how to connect to that group, if you would put that information in the chat. And I just want to commit to all of you on this call that we will be following up with Sarah and to see how we as a group can network with her for our clients who are maybe waiting for a group to start or that sort of thing. Ironic or not, Jane, Karen, and I were working on something very similar. So there's something very special about having us all on the call. So Jane, I'll come back to you, and then Olivia, I see your hand raised, and we'll turn it back to.
Okay. Thanks, y'all.
Yes, thank you.
Yeah, I'm glad you brought that up. Yeah, I have some work that we did together as like a structure and a format. So as you follow up with Lisa, if you guys want to loop me in, and I'd be happy to, reconnect about that.
Thank you, Jane. All right, Olivia, your turn. What question do you have?
Hi, Lisa. It's a compliment first to both you and Karen and to Jane. Karen, your points today, I think, were so spot on. It's so wonderful to see the tools being developed. I think that I saw Sarah's head nodding quite a lot while you were talking, Karen. And I think the key thing that I take away from today is something that those of us who, I mean, I was in probably the first peer-to-peer support group ever, sitting in a hotel room in Cherry Hill, New Jersey in 1981, when we founded Women Exploited by Abortion, and 7 women sat, well, actually there were 6 of us that afternoon, sat in a hotel room and told each other our experiences. So where we are today and what we've learned about what is needed in the process of helping establish safe places, I think is a really beautiful thing to see. So the one thing I want to really suggest or question is, as you're all developing different groups, particularly for those who may not have had abortions, it is important, I think, always, and I think, Karen, would you agree that, and Lisa, you as well, the objective goal is to help identify her sense of self as a whole person beyond the experience of an abortion or abortions or the journey connected around that moment in her life or moments in her life. Because I think everything, this is why I think it's important. Somebody asked the question in the chat, I saw, what if she's got a wall up and you can see that she's in trouble? Well, where I am and where she is are totally different places. So demanding that she come to where I am today is not helping her, because you're not seeing her as that whole person that I think everybody who's involved in PRC work understands. You can only save that baby if you can see the whole mother around the baby. You can see why that mother is important and what her life is going through, so that she can then see her baby. Well, the same is true for those of us who have to learn how to remember our babies. So making anybody come to where you think they ought to be is counterproductive. So I love, Karen, your comment about the intake process needs to not feel like a job interview. That was brilliant. And I want to say that strongly. And I think, Sarah, you should nodded your head tons of times, and we need to talk after this. While I no longer do the group work and I am more involved in public education about what you are doing and what we know, I really think that what we need to be continuing on is, and Karen, this is where I'm questioning, would you and Lisa agree, and Sarah, maybe you would, and Jane, I think you're aware of this, it isn't about the process so much as it is the person. And in identifying that person and helping her see herself as she can't see herself now, I have to put aside all of my preconceived notions about who she is and where she is and what she ought to be. Would you agree that that is perhaps what all of this intake conversation should lead us to? So that she can heal. She can heal only if she's allowed to know that we see her as she is, or he is, in that moment.
Absolutely. And I would add that we want to be that soft place to land for her that isn't in existence anywhere else, right? We have a woman, I use her story all the time, that says abortion's socially acceptable, but nobody's talking about it. And so, yes, in that relationship, it's about her and what she needs, and she's going to direct it, or it's about him and what he wants and what he needs and what he is wanting to do next. Like we're hearing, I mean, you guys, Olivia is a pioneer. Like, this is amazing, Olivia, that you're here. Weba, we wouldn't be here if it wasn't for Weba. And so what an opportunity that we have one of the greats sitting here with us saying, guys, it's not about pro-life, pro-choice right now. It's not even about whatever numbers you have to report to your board. It's about, you have a soul in front of you that needs to be met right where they are. And it may not end in prayer that day. And we have to be okay with that. I am just so grateful for you, Olivia. Thank you for sharing that. I'll give Jane and Karen an opportunity to respond, and then we need to wrap up with closing comments from Kylie.
Well, I want to support what Olivia said. I'm not a program participant or a program member.
Mm-hmm.
I'm a woman at whatever stage in life who's come to you at great expense of my shame and my guilt and my secret, and I need your help and your support.
So good, Jane. Thank you for that. Okay, we know that you have many questions. Please continue to come back. Please follow up with the email that we will send with the PowerPoint that was shared earlier in the intake questions we recommend. You also have a recording that you can rewatch. And we also have these meetings once a month. So be on the lookout for the next meeting and the registration. Jane and Karen, thank you so much for joining us today and for all of you for joining us. And now Kylie has a few housekeeping things and she'll close our meeting.
Yes, thank you so much for giving me some time. I just want to share some housekeeping items as Lisa referred to it. First of all, watch for your postscript. This is where several of you have asked, will I be able to watch this over again? Can I receive this again in another way? Share it with a friend? Yes, the answer is yes. We send those emails out from an email address that says partners@supportafterabortion.com. So watch for that. I'd like to invite everyone to an Unraveled Roots virtual group. It will begin June 8th and run for 6 weeks. It meets from 1 to 2:30 p.m. Eastern Standard Time. We are so blessed with Karen Barbito, co-author of Unraveled Roots, who is going to facilitate this very special group. It's co-ed, so expect to see both men and women in the group, and there is a cap. We have something that we didn't get to talk about today, is that we know that there's a sweet spot in how many people can be seen, heard, and share in a virtual group. So we have a cap to this virtual group of 10 people, and if this is a group that you really need, or a virtual group that you feel called upon by the Lord to share with other people, I can't think of a better way for you to learn about it than from Karen, unless it was Lisa. Then I just want to share with you our June abortion healing provider meeting is going to be on Thursday, June 16th from 4 to 5 p.m. I have taken the liberty of assuming that all of you would like to come next month, and I've already sent you an invitation. The speakers next month are going to be Steve Seiler and Greg Hassick, and we are going to share the soft launch of our Music as a Bridge to Abortion Healing program. All the registrants for this month's meeting are going to receive a first look at an accompanying journal for this program that you'll be able to learn about in June. We have a couple of conferences that we're attending, and we'd love for you to come. Lisa Rowe will be a speaker at the NASW Florida conference. This is a conference specialized for social workers. It's June 9th through 11th in Orlando, Florida. The website, naswfl.org, is where you can learn more about the conference. The workshop that we're hosting is called At Home Abortions, Navigating the Challenges of Client Support. We're also going to the Pro-Life Women's Conference. It's June 24th through the 26th. It's in Indianapolis, Indiana. This may be home to some of you. We would love to see you there. Our workshop there is going to focus on serving others in good mental health. You can learn more about that conference at prolifewomen.com. We are going to be launching a new webinar series. It will be focused on clinical providers. So if you know of or are a student or a practitioner in the field of social work, psychology, psychiatry, pastoral care, or other mental health provider, this is going to be a workshop that's going to specifically speak to your clinical setting. We have our first 3 topics already figured out. The first one is June. It's titled, I'm a Social Worker. This is why I regret not asking my clients about abortions. This is Lisa Rowe's personal testimony, and it is powerful. July, we're going to go into legal implications of not screening for abortions in your intake. And in August, we're going to be talking about credentialing and CEUs that will be available for abortion healing. We invite you, of course, to our training platform, training.supportafterabortion.com. There's anonymous client level materials in there that clients can receive as they wish. You can send them to that section of our website, and they can watch testimonials of men and women who've experienced abortions and may have different facets of their story that they've been able to share We also have certificate programs for providers to be able to disseminate courses that we are hosting. We have a workshop. It's an all-day workshop, Friday, September 16th. You are the first people to know about this. It's going to be hosted by Lisa Rowe and Karen Barbito. Such a power team right there. And they are going to host a workshop on how to start or expand an abortion healing program. This is great for both beginners and advanced providers. So if you serve in excellence, I promise there's still something that this conference can serve you. If you're a beginner and you just have it placed on your heart to serve people, this is a great workshop for you to get your bearings. And then finally, I invite you to add partners at supportafterabortion.com to your distribution list. We want to hear from you. We talk a lot. We want to hear back from you. So please, especially let us know if you are hosting any sort of virtual healing groups that we might be able to refer to. When we process folks through our Hope line, we're always looking for places and spaces that would meet their needs. So please keep us informed about what you're doing and let us know how we can help you at that email address. Lisa, back to you.
Yes, thank you. We are growing, exploring, and remaining curious at Support After Abortion. Thank you, Kylie. We are grateful you have joined us today. We hope that one or all of those things touches your sweet spot and you continue to connect with us. Again, Karen and Jane, thank you. And thank you to each of you for making this a priority today. And we look forward to all that's to come. Invite somebody to join you next month, and we'll see you then. Take care.